Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Who are some people you know personally, or otherwise, who ruined their own lives, and how? My friend constantly makes bad financial decisions. I don't even talk about certain things with him anymore because it'll turn into a pity party. And not like buy $5,000 in lotto tickets, but just constant minor medium bad decisions that snowball. One time he asked me for help. I thought, awesome, great, wonderful. I can help get you on track, I love this. Let's get to work. So, we hammered out 3 budgets. An austerity budget to get him out of debt fast, a balanced budget to pay extra on his debts but still have good spending money, and a monthly minimums budget where he would have the most money to spend. These were monthly budget plans. He could do austerity 1 month, then balance the next, then minimums for 2 months whatever. 2 months later he's bragging about buying a new frivolous purchase he didn't need because he got a great deal on it. Oh, and he financed it. Through the store. At 17% interest. I asked him how that fit into the budget. He said he would make it work because he couldn't pass up the deal. My wayward brother, you didn't get a deal. You got taken for a ride. You spent a bunch of money you didn't have, to buy something you didn't need, at an interest rate you can't afford. Your financial situation is bad because you make bad decisions. You have the life you deserve because you keep choosing the life you have. I work in project management for construction. I have seen many apprentices fall into the pit of alcohol/drug addiction within the first couple of years of them being on the job and losing everything. Thankfully, it tends to happen earlier in their life, so some of them are able to recover and bounce back. Others aren't so lucky. Another is my best friend in high school. He became a drug dealer and dropped out before graduating. He eventually got caught on camera selling a couple of kilograms of cocaine to an informant and served several years in prison. My auntie and one of her daughters. They live in a cycle of violence. My auntie got married to a druggy violent man, had 4 kids, every single one today deals with trauma. One of her daughters ended up getting in the same trap as her mother, had 3 kids all from different fathers, the dads were all involved in crime/drugs. She ended up getting killed by one of the fathers. She was just 32. Her kids now are dealing with the trauma of her loss. Her oldest child was 13 when she died. We're pretty distant, but I feel a lot for them. My mother. She and my dad started using meth together, she got hooked, he didn't. When it became clear her use was causing risk to her young daughters, my dad left, and my mom slept with her dealer. That was 29 years ago, and their ONS turned into a relationship that's still ongoing. He's thrown coffee tables and hammers at her, I watched him beat the shit out of her immediately after surgery, I was protecting their young son, so there was nothing I could do, he broke her arm a couple of times, he hit her with his pickup truck, he strangled her in front of their teenage son, and I recently learned he takes advantage of her, too, through insisting on engaging some acts that cause her physical harm to her health. He's going to kill her someday, but she won't leave, despite having every opportunity, limitless help, and very supportive family. He gets her high, and that always takes her right back to him. My younger sister. Whip-smart, straight-A star athlete bound for great things. Wanted to be a doctor and absolutely could have been. Come college time, she knowingly falsified her FAFSA to get more money that she wasn't entitled to, $11,000 to be exact. Which she did not spend on school. College caught her and she couldn't repay the $11,000, so they kicked her out. She started a fraudulent GoFundMe for $11,000 and was investigated and forced to return the money she raised. Nearly caught a record. She scrambled for a minimum wage job and bought an expensive Jeep, which was Repo D when she couldn't make the payments. She decided to break into my house to get even with me for finishing college and steal stuff. I was home. She caught a restraining order. Ended up catching 3 restraining orders from different people. Nowadays she works minimum wage jobs and has all her tax returns and such garnished to pay back her $11,000 debt. My wife met someone who attached themselves to her as the best friend. We moved closer to them and everything. Then things unraveled. This friend started off as a bit electric. Then controlling. Then an obvious need to be the center of all attention. Then was asked to leave the house. Turned out she was overemphasizing her kid's illnesses, raised thousands to cure him, and ended up in court for scamming people to pay for a holiday she could already afford, just for the attention. Ruined her, and her family lives just to be, as the term is now, the main character. I knew a guy that ran a scheme that basically printed free money. Here in the Netherlands, you have anonymous public transport cards. These cards have unique IDs, kind of like credit cards. Unlike credit cards, they were sequential, kind of. So, it meant if you had one card, you could guess about 20 to 30 card numbers. If a card expires, you can claim the money back from the card by typing in its number into a website. What he would do is find cards that had expired. Look for the 20 to 30 cards around it and empty them. The dude made easily 10K plus. It isn't illegal either because of the terms of the anonymous card. The dude ended up dropping out of and spending it on a new PC setup. He then got himself addicted to heroin, and I've never heard from him again. Before he found this scheme, he was getting his rent paid for by his mom, so I assume he's still in the same place. But the last time I saw him, I'm pretty sure he had no clue what was going on. Met a guy 8 years ago, who was clearly a pathological liar. He worked as a contract security guard at the office I worked at. He constantly told me and other coworkers about his crazy life. Apparently he was a trained Navy SEAL sniper but had to go into witness protection and then became a doctor, scientist, lawyer, police officer, etc. Had an IQ of 180 apparently, also went to MIT. The story was always changing, but despite all this somehow he ended up as a security guard making $8 an hour. Over the years, he has basically lied about everything, continually lost jobs because of it, doesn't care, just keeps lying about everything. It is really sad. I don't work with him anymore, but I see his social media posts claiming he is the franchise owner of a McDonald's. Meanwhile he is just a fry cook, and then 3 weeks later, he posts about being a corporate executive at Walmart when in reality, the guy is working there bagging groceries. It's just sad. My dad ruined his life. He is mildly to moderately mentally ill. It could have been treated and he could have been fine. He was very functional even into my teen years. The real problem is his toxic behavior. Hi. Is. Never. Wrong. Ever. He will argue with anyone about anything. Always. He can't get help with his physical health because he knows more than they do. Same with physical therapy. Same with nurses. Same with mechanics. Same with contractors. Same with plumbers. Same with friends. He's hands down the most miserable person I've ever dealt with. All he ever mumbles are that no one will help him with anything. They won't help because he's going to tell them how many ways they did it wrong. He's always the smartest in the room. He's such a man. The sad thing is that he is smart. Wicked smart. But he has the emotional intelligence of a turd. He could have been anything in the world. He chose to be a miserable man. I sometimes wonder if my mother ruined her own life by being so blind to her issues. I don't believe she can feel any joy, and much of that is because she has an incredibly high opinion of herself, yet the lowest self-esteem I've seen in a person. She is incapable of taking accountability for her emotions and actions, and just strikes me deeply unsettled. How can someone be happy and live a fulfilled life like that? I believe her lack of self-reflection has isolated her and will continue to isolate her, and my father. And in many ways I think that's a path to ruin a life where there was so much more to offer. It's sad, and breaks my heart, but it's her responsibility. I can only do so much. A woman had an affair and divorced her husband. She also alienated her children. Her lover was still married, and his wife started stalking her. She quit her job and moved out of town to get away. In the new town she couldn't get a job, so her parents supported her. Her lover got a divorce, and they got back together. She tried getting her racist parents to accept her lover, and they disowned her. She married her lover so she wouldn't be homeless, tried starting a business, but her new husband was a terrible businessman and made her do all the work anyway. They went bankrupt. She divorced him. Got back in with her mother after her father died but moved out again after a series of hook-up and bars. She got married again. Her mother died, and she found she had been cut out of the will. Now, no one in her family talks to her, including her kids. That's all so far. Worked as a waitress in my late teens at a fine dining place with a bar. An elementary school teacher would come in with a friend, get way too drunk, and pee on the bar stools. After the second time it happened, they got kicked out for good. In the following days, the rest of her night surfaced in the newspaper. She left in her own car by herself, bad friend. She first drove to Jack in the Box and caused a hit and run, then drove to the lake dock. City has a giant man-made lake in the middle, parked and passed out. She was awoken by a cop at 6 a.m., knocking on her window because it's illegal to park your car on the dock. Instead of rolling down her window and talking to the guy, she decided to floor it, into the lake. She lost her job, lost her car, had to pay for the hit and run as well as her own search and rescue. Had a friend in high school I used to smoke weed with. It all seemed fine until I noticed she started taking cold medicine to get high and it escalated from there. She ended up getting kicked out of my school and was sent to the alternative school. We kept in touch, but she decided I didn't fit in with her other friends, so we lost contact. About 7 years later I noticed she got married and had just had a son. I sent her a message congratulating her and wishing her well. She was telling me about how proud she was to be sober and how she got hooked on heroin for a while but quit for her son. We caught up and I was happy for her new start in life. A week later she was found dead in her shower from an overdose. Guy I know, well, he wasn't too successful to begin with. But he was working at Walmart. I worked there previously, and I had already got fired. I can't remember if he quit or got fired. But when his last check came, he thought they were cheating him out of money. So, he called up to talk about it and basically their response was eat shit. So, he hung up, hit redial, and called in a bomb threat to Walmart. Because if you think they are withholding $37 of your money, that's the next reasonable step. Even after he got released from jail, he was never able to get his life together again. Probably looks odd on a resume, lol. My family member and her husband tried and failed for years to have children. 3 rounds of IVF failed. Then a final chance Hail Mary attempt was paid for by her mom. It really was their last opportunity to have biological children. They had twins, a boy, and a girl. Perfect, right? A few years later they divorced as the dad was a horrible drunk. He drank away his family's future. They don't see dad now. He's lost his home, job, and family through drinking. Mom and kids are doing well with heavy support from family, but every time I think of him, I just think, you had it all, dude. I had a very good friend who saved up money over the summer by flipping yard sale finds on eBay. He used the money to buy a motorcycle. About a year later he got in an accident at night. A hit and run. Somebody found him on the side of the road barely alive and called 911. He'd had a TBI and was never the same after that. He would have erratic mood swings and would do crazy stuff for a while. Then he'd go back to normal and try to pick up the pieces and then he'd wig out again. He pushed most of his friends away with his temper and attitude and he quit his job as a drafter to go live in a tent and be a musician. Shortly after that he was in another accident where he broke his legs and lost a finger. He was back living at home and trying to piece his life back together when his father passed and then a few months later he died of an undiagnosed heart issue at 37. Worked with a guy, decent job, good pay, solidly middle-class career, but blue collar. This guy, though, fancied himself a rebel, bought himself a Harley, and started hanging out with bikers. Played poker with them, he said. Then he started calling them brothers, wearing biker merch, but he wasn't their brother. They took his bike for debts owed, then they took his house for debts owed. The company tried to rehab him, but he was too far in, too far gone. The last time I saw him he was in his mid-40s, no teeth, no home, and very presently no job. There was nothing funny about it, it was just one long, sad, downward spiral. I had a truck driver buddy who started hanging around with the local Hells Angels chapter. He was a little guy with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and hanging out with legit outlaw bikers went right to his head. He started strutting around like he was a big shot, being a dick to everyone, convinced the HA were going to take him on as a prospect. Turns out they only wanted him around for the route he drove and the drugs he could transport on that route for them. Got himself fired for trying to intimidate his boss over some imagined slight, and the HA laughed him out of the clubhouse. Bikers aren't your friends. My stepsister has an irrevocable life trust granted to her as a baby. Her house, car, living expenses, and a portion of the interest the trust generates is given to her quarterly. Well, she's a meth head, 2 babies by 2 drug dealer prison-type men with domestic violence and threats of homicide. Spent 20 years taking and dropping classes to get her degree, for God knows what reason is she never has had to work. The family tried to cut her off financially and learned the hard way what an irrevocable life trust really is. She has untreated bipolar and has antisocial personality disorder, psychopath, so probably incapable of living a good life regardless. She's never had to do an adult thing in her life, not even raising her kids, grandmas. Her life sucks, and she's going to be a third-strike prisoner if she gets caught again and has a suspended sentence hanging over her head. My uncle was a star baseball player in high school. Got scouted by the Oakland A's, who then invited him to a tryout. Some girls he liked said she'd go out with him, so he just bailed and didn't go to the tryout. He figured he was so good there would be plenty of opportunities. No more scouts. Just that single date with the girl who then blew him off. He spent his entire life working in fast food restaurants and intermittently hooked on drugs of one kind of another. One failed marriage in his 40s. No kids. Died single and alone. No one found him for 3 days in his trailer. Talked about his one shot all throughout his life like they had screwed him out of fame and fortune because he was too good for the game. Just a truly sad person. Yep, one of my ex-girlfriends is now homeless because she couldn't stop doing meth. When we first got together she was the manager of a record store making good money, getting backstage passes for concerts, etc. Then she really got hardcore into meth and started stealing from the store to support her habit. Things went downhill from there, and now she lives in a tent. No job, no car, no income, no longer have any friends. I left her before things got really bad, because I saw what was coming down the road, but it's still depressing to see someone you care for fall so hard. Well, that, and she was blaming me for the reason why our bills weren't getting paid, but it was actually her spending the money on dope. One of my best friends growing up got really bad with that stuff. I gave him a ride when he was homeless, and he spent the time telling me how he owned the hotel he was sleeping in and that he was undercover trying to catch the drug dealers in the park across the street. Then he wanted to go to the Apple store and buy several hundred iPads for his employees. It was weird, he looked, talked, and acted like I remembered him, but he wasn't the same person. Even if he got sober, I don't think he will ever be right again. I knew a couple of math heads when I was younger. A stolen phone, stolen headphones, stealing my car and getting a DUI in it, and a stolen laptop later. I finally decided they weren't worth being around. I was desperate for friends, and I smoked weed and drank with them, but I never did meth with them. That stuff scared me, and I kept trying to get them to stop, but they never listened. What really did it though was seeing how they were the morning after doing it, no motivation and looking like they were on the verge of a breakdown. I like drugs, but being exposed to that scared me away from the hard stuff. Agreed. One of my best friends, same block growing up since kindergarten, got into it. As much as we're family, in the few years they struggled, they're different now even when they're clean. That person before is gone, and they have so much remorse and regret for losing that person too, yet they go back each time. It's a cycle that I've lost my best friend to. It's become so predictable. No relationships, felonies, jail, being broke, blaming the world, and always finding an excuse to do more of it. We don't sit and laugh anymore what we did for about 20 years. I think you get to the point of saying things like that when you realize the addict has had many opportunities to change and never does. He said that he likes being drunk and living on the street. He kicked a crack addiction only to find meth. It's been 20 years of homelessness and being in and out of jail, rehab, and mental health facilities. He truly has no quality of life and can only manage to stay sober and drug-free for at most 7 days. This has been going on for over 20 years. We are exhausted. His body has to be exhausted. Unfortunately, death for him is inevitable. I have a cousin whose boyfriend and the father of her 3 children has been an off and on heroin addict basically since their first kid. That first kid is going to be 16 soon and my parents have custody of him because my cousin started using it eventually too. They lived in squalor with their 3 kids for years, eventually got evicted due to unsafe living conditions, then lived in a rat-packed car full of garbage with 3 kids for 2 years. Finally, CPS took the kids away. Their dad had made zero effort to contact them whatsoever in the year and a half that my family has had custody of the kiddos, and their mom shows up to some visits, but misses more than she makes. It is so hard for them. Their mom's health is rapidly declining. Her teeth are breaking and rotting. Her weight is all over the place. None of us know where she is living. It's exhausting emotionally. Their mom is only a few years older than me, and we lived together growing up. I love her so much, but I don't recognize her anymore and she refuses every offer of help. I don't know what it's going to take for her to wake up and ask for help. She's lost her children, she's homeless, she has nothing. I worry she is just going to die from an addict. Her children are all delightful, which is a testament to the kind of person she was before drugs took over her life. It is so painful to watch her hurt them. I don't wish death on her, but I relate to just wanting it to all be over and not seeing any other way that will happen. When I was a kid, my much older cousin broke into our elderly grandparents' house and robbed them blind, literally anything the slightest bit valuable he could fit in the back of his truck. Then pawned it all for heroin money. They didn't report him because they felt sorry for him. The next person he robbed wasn't so generous and he ended up doing something like 8 years in prison and has been in and out of jails and prisons ever since. He tried to rob my house once. He's in his 40s now and just got locked up again. Whole life wasted because of drugs. I helped an old friend of my mother-in-law for some time. She was in recovery for some years. She had drunk so heavily for so long she developed a neurological disorder which left her debilitated. She gradually lost her balance, her motor skills and coordination, and is now hospitalized and unable to care for herself. She is almost a decade younger than me, and her life of independence is over. She will remain bedridden and rely on others for her most basic needs for the remaining years of her life. This is neither far-fetched nor the worst-case scenario. People die from addiction every day. I've never been a sober guy that'll shame people for drinking. That said, I'm absolutely the sober guy who will congratulate someone for even the smallest achievement. There's nothing wrong with drinking if you can do so in moderation, but if you're anything like me and suck at moderation, even something as small as skipping a weekend is a step towards breaking the habit. If you ever decide to make it permanent and need company, check out the Stop Drinking subreddit. It's a massive community of people who are sober but not annoying and pushy about it. And if you don't make it permanent, have a beer for me. It depends on how coherent they are. Watching them do it, from the outside, it's worse than death, but for the person I know, he's not really cognizant of how, from my perspective, how his life is. 3 years younger than me, he was a tow truck driver, making about $1,200 plus a week. Lots of people offer drugs and other favors to get a deal. Got addicted to drugs, graduated to Fent, lost that job, lost about 5 jobs in the span of a few months when I was trying to help him. Crashed his car, ran out of money, started stealing duster from Walmart, ended up in jail. Last I heard from him, pretty sure he destroyed his brain and just exists to chase the next high. He doesn't seem to really comprehend how far he's fallen. There was a way to earn interest on the pile of Luna coins you held. I think it was called staking. A ton of financial influencers were pumping out content about how much money you could make staking Luna, and then it absolutely imploded. Wiped my uncle out completely. He went from owning his own home, fully paid, and 3 rental properties with mortgages to living in a studio apartment. Exactly what just happened to my best friend. For literally over a year, he had been complaining about the same issues with his GF. She invalidated him, his stepdaughter wouldn't listen to him, he only liked being with her when they were drinking. He finally got out too. They broke up and he signed a lease with his brother. I knew he'd still move around with her, so I told him to not trust her and wear a condom. Guess what happened a month after they broke up? She got pregnant. Now he's stuck in a hell he built. Over the years we've watched my brother's, now former, best friend ruin his life. It probably started my senior year of high school. I went to a friend's prom and saw him there, total shock as he's my brother's age, nearly 8 years older than me. I asked what he was doing there, and he said he was taking his girlfriend to prom. That's when and I think my family, found out he was 25 and dating a 17 to 18-year-old. They continued dating and it's of course not a good relationship. They have a child. She gets a DUI/DWI charge with the child in the car. At some point in time, he becomes addicted to hard drugs. Friend is struggling in all facets, so my brother gives him a job at his place of work. Friend ends up stealing equipment, both company and personal equipment bought by coworkers. My brother fires him after giving him many chances to come forward and admit what he did. I'm omitting a lot of stuff, but I believe my brother is now in C. Sometimes I'll hear a former friend's name mentioned and people will giggle, saying he's still up to his usual shenanigans, doesn't have his life together, etc. One time someone mentioned former friend's name as a scare tactic to get my nephews into doing their homework, like if you don't work now, you'll end up like him. I know it makes my brother sad. He tends to be very reserved when talking about this. I remember growing up with this guy and looking up to him almost. As a teen he was very friendly, capable, and outgoing. Always makes that initial HS prom interaction more bizarre and creepier. Oh, that reminds me of a guy. A weirdo, even for being a CS major in the early 2010s. He was classmates with a friend of mine. They would sometimes game together, mostly Diablo 3. Well, weirdo has no contact in the middle of a big group assignment. But they could see he was active online in D3, almost regardless of when they checked. They looked at his stats and saw he had clocked in over 100 hours in a little under 6 days. He didn't make it for 2 semesters. I know a guy who just dropped contact one time, which was out of character for him, but his account said he was active on one of his favorite games. We figured it was fine, it happens, until like a couple days goes by and he's nowhere to be seen. Being that I was the only one in our online group who actually knew where he lived, across the country from me, and had contact info from him, I called his mom. Which was a singularly weird experience, because she didn't really understand how I'd gotten her number or who I was. Imagine getting a call from a stranger and hearing, "Hello Mrs. C, I'm Doug's friend, we play games together, and we haven't heard from him in a while. He's usually hanging out with us, and he didn't say he was out of town or anything, so we were worried." She hadn't heard from him either, and went to check his apartment. Found his PC hooked up and his RuneScape farming bot going ham on some trees, but no sign of him. She was worried, called the cops, his dad, his ex, and everyone they could think of. After about 6 hours, he gets in contact and says that he's in Paris with one of his oldest, and very rich, friends and they'd be back soon. Keep in mind, he lived west coast of the US, Paris is pretty much the other side of the world. He didn't mean to just dip, but when the opportunity to go on a multiple country, week-long bachelor party totally free came up, he took it. He'd just gotten too drunk/busy to tell anyone about it. I knew a guy that completely hibernated his life to WoW and dropped college altogether. Last time I heard from him, he's still working at a factory building mower engines. The same as he was back in 08 foot when I first met him. Still single and in the same apartment. Still eats the same thing, 3 times a day, which the food preps every Sunday for himself. And still plays WoW 10 hours a day minimum. On the upside though, I'm pretty sure he has sold several accounts of his for thousands of dollars each over the years. 32M coworker. Nice quiet guy. Up and coming at work. He had just been talked to about joining management. Better hours, double wages, and benefits. He was in a serious relationship with a girl at work. Her mother also worked there. Some holidays where we had extra days off work. He hits up Starbucks, buys 3 venti for quad shots coffees. Goes home. He played either WoW or Eve, I don't remember which. This guy gets so into his game it's all he does for 7 days straight. Starbucks was just around the corner from him. He would take a short break, get his coffee, and go back to the game. No food though. After day 4 he didn't come to work. Nobody had heard from him, and his attendance was good. By day 7 he ends up giving himself caffeine-induced psychosis with hallucinations. He freaked out thinking someone was after him. He called the police a couple of times. They didn't show up fast enough for him. He drives to the police station and drives his car into a bunch of police cars in front. He's screaming, completely losing his mind. Cops come out and thump the fear out of him for hitting their cars. He gets tasered repeatedly. He gets tossed in a cell. Cops messed him up. Work and other people found out when we saw the story on TV and in the newspaper. He was never the same after. He came back to work, but the management position was close to him. He was back to a basic position. His girlfriend broke up with him because her mother told her to. He lost almost everything and had issues with a fogged brain and PTSD. Family member addicted to shopping. Her and her husband made really good money and could have had a very comfortable life. Every single year she decided she didn't like their house, sold at a loss, and then renovated and bought all new designer furniture for every new house. On top of that, she constantly bought multiple pieces of the same designer clothes and jewelry, art, cosmetic procedures, etc. Eventually they couldn't even get a mortgage anymore and were in an insane amount of debt, lost their cars and everything else they owned. She ended up stealing her mother's credit card to use for restaurants and attempted to make a bunch of frivolous lawsuits which just resulted in more legal debt. I work in debt consolidation. I talk to clients that have gone through this. They are addicted to spending and are spending more than they can repay. They do it for years and years. It's working because they are paying their creditors. Every once in a while they run into some money. Maybe they made a good investment, got a bonus, etc. That helps them keep everything alive. Keep in mind, if you talk to those people in daily life, you have no idea anything is wrong. They aren't addicted to drugs or alcohol, they are addicted to credit. Sure, they have nice things, but that doesn't mean they have a problem. Eventually they start getting told, they go for that new loan, they get said no, they go for that new mortgage, they get said no, they then call me. My job is making them understand they have a problem. They are addicted to credit, and it worked for a long time because they were successful, but things changed and what they were doing isn't sustainable. I deal with this stuff every day. I have a cousin who fell in with the wrong crowd in secondary school. He came from a good family, they had a nice home and plenty of money, he had a good upbringing and socialized with good people, and he had every opportunity in the world to make something of himself, but instead he started dabbling in recreational drugs. It started out pretty innocent, some weed and some uppers when he was partying, but it quickly progressed into a horrible addiction to both meth and heroin. In the space of 2 years, he had gotten to a point where he was actively hiding from one of the biggest drug gangs in our country. That gang actually showed up at his grandparents' house demanding their money, who then had to pay up. This happened several times, leaving his grandparents close to bankruptcy. He kept running. After another few years of using it, he got brave and thought that maybe they weren't looking for him any longer. He had gotten hundreds of thousands worth of drugs to push at this point, but had used them instead. He moved into an apartment and tried to start a life for himself. He got off the drugs, and while he still smoked weed, he seemed to really be doing better. That is, until one night when he, his wife, and 2 children were sleeping, and their apartment was set on fire. They barely made it out. The stress of it all drove him towards drugs again. Now, around 5 years later, his wife left him, he got her hooked too, he abandoned his 2 children who are now with other relatives and has gotten another girl pregnant. He has stolen from everybody he knows and can't even be trusted inside of anyone's home anymore. He has been to rehab countless times, but it never helps. He gets out and goes straight back to his old ways. His grandparents filed for bankruptcy after his 4th stint in rehab, his dad committed suicide, his mother sadly passed away in a car accident, his children don't even remember what he looks like, he can't hold down a job, he lives on the streets. He ruined his own life, but also the lives of everyone close to him. A friend from HS won $1,000 a week for life. Never went to college. Never held down a long-term job. Always worried some lady is trying to take his money by getting pregnant or stealing it through marriage. Has had a very mediocre life without much progression or new relationships. The rest of the friend group used to think he was the luckiest guy alive. Now we all just try to keep his spirits up when we get together and keep our advice to ourselves. He is aware of the solutions to his problems at a 10-mile view, but the $1,000 per week has sapped his will to execute any self-improvement plan. When he won, we weren't too far out of HS, and $1,000 per week seemed like a ton of money in the early 90s. However, he decided why to go to college? He'd get a job and after a short time he'd get upset over some small issue or another. He'd say, I don't have to put up with this, and quit on the spot. Relationships were completely disposable to him. Now he has to have a job to live a semblance of a middle-class life. He is bitter about it because you can imagine the jobs he is qualified for. We have tried to gently mentor him when he asks why the disparity between our lives and his, but he doesn't really want viable solutions that will require an effort. He wants an easy fix like the one he got way back when. Knew a guy just like this. He had a cute, young wife and very few bills. We took them out to dinner one night. While waiting maybe 15 minutes for our table, another guest walks in and goes straight to a table his friends and family are sitting at. My buddy goes, who the hell is that guy? Walking right in and sitting down? I mean, I'm the hero and he's a zero. I found out later on that this guy was dishonorably discharged and saw him on FB making threats to his former superiors. After about a year of doing nothing other than complaining and buying motorcycles and wrecking them, his wife left him. I hope she's doing great now. He moved away shortly after that. I used to hang out with a guy who was one of those super friendly, talkative, gets along with everyone to a fault kind of guys. I will call him Jack. Jack was the kind of guy who would order 3 drinks and 3 shots right before happy hour ended and then would proceed to down all 3 shots and chug 2 of the drinks. He was never really at home unless he was throwing a party, so his entire diet consisted of alcohol, weed, and takeout. Then one day Jack collapsed and was taken to the hospital. Turns out his kidneys were shutting down. He had been taking antacids constantly and so often that it just wrecked his kidneys. They had to put him into a medically induced coma, and he was in the hospital for months. When Jack got out and we started seeing him active, he would still have the occasional drink, but gone were the days of ordering so many rights at the end of happy hour. He didn't care about the price of the drink, because he only ever had 1 or 2. One thing he realized was that he had been spending a small fortune on booze. He could spend 1/4 of that on weed and have a ton of weed. That became his new vice. That would have been fine. He was still the same guy he was before. Then Jack started going harder. It didn't take long for him to develop a very hardcore coke habit. Like, to the point that he was financially ruining himself. He was hiding vials in the bathroom ceiling at the bar and other places. He descended into a very bad place. All of us tried at multiple points to intervene and get something. Anything. He refused to listen or acknowledge. One by one, people turned away from him. The last time I saw Jack, he was coked out of his mind at the bar and came up and tried to talk to me. We hadn't talked in months. After a minute of rambling, I just asked him what happened to him. He asked what I meant, and I told him, man, you were great, and people loved hanging with you. Not everything about you revolves around your next line. What happened, man? I wasn't upset, mad, or accusatory. I was sad. He got upset and walked away from me. I never really saw him after that. I hadn't been hanging out at that bar as much as I used to. I would like to hear about him here. Stories about how he was kicked out of and banned from every bar in the area. See, he was still very much into the coke, but he offset that by starting to drink heavily again and saying and do that just wasn't acceptable. Then one night a couple years later I ran into some of the guys that were part of that crew from back in the day. We were talking and catching up. One of them had kept in touch with Jack and was telling us about how Jack had finally started to turn his life around. He was offered a good job in a town across the state that he started earlier that week. All of us agreed that was great. A fresh start in a new place might be good for him, and then he told us the rest of the story. On his first day, Jack called in and told them he needed a vacation day and gave them a blatantly false story. I shook my head and said, okay, that sounds more like the Jack I remember. The next night I was at a bar watching football and the guy who had kept in touch with Jack came in and asked me if I had heard. Jack was found dead in his apartment. We found out later that his health problems never really went away. The day he died, he was at a doctor appointment where he was told that he didn't have more than a year left. The amount of damage done to his body just simply could not be fixed and the time to do something about it had passed by a couple of years. No one is 100% certain about what happened next, but it appears he stopped at a liquor store on his way home, bought a load of booze and then went home and proceeded to drink himself to death. My friend's daughter called in multiple bomb threats to a local high school. She got caught and convicted. She was 18 at the time, so she was an adult record. Edit, this was post 9/11 and didn't happen in the US. From what I understand, she didn't like a teacher and was having issues. Don't know the details. There were dozens of threats over the course of months. The police responses cost several million and the whole community felt terrorized. She pleaded guilty and got a 3-month conditional sentence. Knew a girl in high school and fell out of touch aside from seeing her occasional Facebook post. We had come from a relatively affluent town outside of Charleston, but drugs were widely available. One day on Facebook, I saw the young woman was in the hospital getting her arm amputated. She had fallen into hard drugs. The next post I saw was her bragging about how her dope dealer visited her in the hospital and helped her shoot up. My heart was broken to see something as disastrous as having your arm amputated wasn't enough for her to get the help she needed. I'd say I hope she is doing better, but I don't think she is. My FIL keeps giving his pathological liar, thief, drug addict son money, to the cost of his savings, his retirement, his house, his marriage, and his relationship with every other family member, including my husband. Twice a month his pension hits, and twice a month his pet psychopath pops up with new, increasingly improbable stories explaining why he needs money this time. Sometimes he doesn't bother asking, just steals it. When my FIL was in the hospital with heart problems, my BIL broke into his bank account and drained it. The truth is drugs, the truth has always been drugs, the truth may someday not be drugs, but it is not today. My FIL continues to insist that the problem has never been drugs, even when he's calling everyone up begging for money to send him to rehab. My FIL has made it clear that he doesn't care how many other people's savings he may destroy in his quest to never, ever say no to his precious favorite golden baby boy. He used to treat my husband as a human ATM until my husband put his foot down. At that point he pitched a giant screaming public fit and refused to speak to us for over a year. It's sad, don't get me wrong, but also, frankly, as someone who has a husband and a household and a future to protect, hate that guy. I went to tech school with a guy. We both got IT jobs at the same company in the 1980s. We were co-workers in an office job. He was very good, and I expected him to be at least as good as myself in his career. In the early 1990s, he left his wife and just started doing stupid stuff with booze and drugs. He's been in and out of jail since then. That was ruinous enough, but it can always get worse. The real ruining of his life was when he killed his father in 2020. His father had dementia and my friend was supposed to be his caretaker. With COVID shutting down probation reporting, my friend started drinking again. He got mad at his poor father while drunk and strangled him to death. He was sentenced to 7 to 25 years for third-degree murder. I still talk to him from prison. Cousin of mine. Long story. Jill is, IMO, mildly intellectually disabled. She always had school issues and the school would send home reports basically saying she was fit only for fast food jobs. My uncle would just chuckle about it. My mom tried talking to him so many times, suggesting trade schools for Jill. When Jill started hanging out with a bad crowd, she tried warning my uncle. He laughed. His kid was 12 and he just let her go visit adult cousins of ours with severe drug and alcohol problems for a day or two at a time. Jill started dating at 18. A girl who was 15. You can guess where this went when her dad found out. Jill got a reprimand, but within a week was caught with the girl again. Served 2 years in prison and became an offender. Jill gets out and has a live-in relationship with a girl from prison. They're both recovering addicts, so they both relapse. At some point, my cousin starts robbing delivery drivers while high. Gets caught, is lucky to only get 2 years in prison because my uncle bails her out and gets a great attorney. Gets out. Starts dating another addict from prison. Over the next 5 years, steals or borrows over $90,000 from her stepdad. Cycles between living with him and on the street. Girlfriend dies of a stroke. Jill is now mentally ill. She believes her girlfriend has had a baby boy and is in the hospital. Jill talks to her dead girlfriend sometimes. She gets violent with her mom, who is scared of her. Stepdad cycles between wanting to walk out and feeling helpless. They don't know if it's from the years of drugs, schizophrenia, or something else. I don't know what they're doing to help. It's hard to say it's only Jill's fault. This started when she was a child, and all the adults responsible for her ignored warnings. She's had so many chances. She's 36 now and at this point, probably isn't too far off from an overdose or getting killed in another robbery. I know a man that's currently in the process of ruining his reputation. He's successful in his field and well respected. His son turned out to be a child predator and got outed, is in jail currently. Even though the evidence was undeniable and overwhelming, the father refused to acknowledge the guilt of his son. The father was sort of a community leader type and a pastor of all things. Refused to condemn the actions of his son and even has gone so far as to call the victims liars, etc. Calling it a conspiracy, etc., as if he's important enough that anyone would even bother to conspire against him. And get this, he's not claiming the conspiracy is against his son, but against him, with his son being collateral damage. Insanity. Classic narcissistic behavior. This man has been bragged on over the decades by his group of religious friends far beyond the point that is normal or healthy for a person to be flattered, to the point it poisoned his ego. Of course, once that happens, the individual is blind to it. For the last several years he's been hemorrhaging friends, business acquaintances, church members, etc., and fallen into the delusional finger-pointing that you would expect. It will probably end in madness for the dude if he keeps it up. On top of this, his son is about to be released from prison on good behavior, and although he will carry the infamous card, will probably be treated by his family as though he were some wrongfully accused victim in the scenario. They likely won't safeguard children around him. All because he isn't willing to accept that his son is a pervert. A friend of mine from high school, who was a grade behind me, went from being voted most likely to succeed to being a homeless meth addict. He was one of my very best friends. Richard, not his real name, was the golden child. He is the youngest, by quite a bit, of 3 boys, and his parents were significantly older. Everything came naturally to him growing up. He's incredibly brilliant, AP classes, etc., and an exceptionally talented musician, pianist, saxophonist, and was drum major his senior year. He's also gay but was not out yet, although it was pretty obvious during high school. He started marching drum corps, color guard, after his senior year. We lost touch during college, before the internet and email were a thing, and well before Facebook. My parents ran into him and gave him my phone number, as I had moved out of state. He called me and was going on and on about how we would have to get together and do X when we did. No. No thanks. I'll make a very long story short, but it seems like once he was no longer a big fish in a little pond, he learned that life doesn't come easily, and no one is going to hand you anything on a silver platter anymore. He didn't attend college and couldn't hold down a job. He got deeper and deeper into drugs and turned to Grindr and basically prostituting himself out to support his habit and his lifestyle. He would beg our friends for money all the time, claiming he needed a hotel room or whatever. He went too far as to ask my mom for money. I watched how drugs affected my brother's life. Thankfully he's clean now, and I was not going to enable him by giving him money. I tried getting him to agree to get help, but since I wasn't giving him money, I was no longer any use to him. He's no longer in communication now with any of our friend group. It's been about 8 years since we heard from him. We've checked in with his mom periodically. She's had it with him. She only pays for his phone so that she knows he's still alive. He treats her badly too. It's so incredibly sad. He could have accomplished anything but passed his whole life away.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.